I had your name typed in the search bar. 3:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because I've looked at that memory more times than I should be able to count. The screen was bright in a dark room, and for 47 seconds, I know it was 47 because some part of me was counting. Your name sat there, waiting. And then I deleted it, letter by letter. I want to tell you that was an act of discipline. That it was the correct decision. That I weighed the pros and cons with the same precision I bring to every significant choice in my life, and I arrived at the right conclusion. But here's what I can't make myself believe anymore. Discipline and fear feel identical from the inside. I have built things that changed how the world works. I have made calls that most people would have collapsed under. I have sat in rooms where the pressure was the kind that reshapes people, and I have held position. And I couldn't press send on a message that said your name. There's something living in that gap that I haven't been willing to examine. Until tonight, the message I didn't send you has been sitting in the part of me that doesn't get quiet when everything else goes quiet. And I'm starting to think the reason I keep waking up at 3 a.m. isn't the work. It's the message I keep not sending. I've timed things my whole life. Not obsessively. Functionally. In the kind of work I do, time is not abstract. Seconds matter. The gap between decision and execution can determine outcomes that affect thousands of people. I have learned to be precise about time, the way a surgeon is precise about instruments, not from anxiety, but from respect for what precision produces. So the fact that I know it was 47 seconds means something. 3:17 in the morning. The screen was the only light in the room. Your name was in the search bar, exactly 4 letters into it, before I stopped and looked at what I was doing. And then I sat there, 47 seconds. In 47 seconds, I have made decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I have green-lit projects that hundreds of people would spend years building. I have rejected paths that would have been the defining choice for most people's careers. I can do extraordinary things in 47 seconds. I couldn't send you a message. What I want to describe, and I want to describe it carefully, because I think this is where something true lives, is what was actually happening in those 47 seconds. Because it wasn't blankness. It wasn't indecision in the way that word usually means. I wasn't weighing pros and cons. I was sitting with the specific weight of what the message would mean. There's a version of reaching out that is casual. Hey, after years of silence. An observation about something mutual. Those things exist. People do them. They're a kind of low-stakes re-entry, a way of testing whether the door still opens without committing to walking through it. That's not what the message was going to be. I knew what the message was going to be before I started typing. I knew exactly what I wanted to say, had known, if I'm honest with myself, for longer than I could calmly account for. The search bar wasn't research. It was a step towards something that had been building a very long time. And 47 seconds later, I deleted your name letter by letter and put the phone down. Have you ever been that close to saying something true, and then pulled back, and then tried to figure out how to feel about the pulling back? Whether it was wisdom or cowardice, whether the restraint was the right call or just the easier one. Because I've been sitting with that question since 3:17 a.m., and I'm not sure the morning light has brought me any closer to an answer. The 47 seconds keep replaying, not the decision at the end. The seconds themselves. The specific quality of what it felt like to be that close to your name, to have it right there, in that little bar, waiting, and to feel something I can't quite categorize. Here's what I know for certain, it wasn't indifference. Whatever was happening in those 47 seconds, it was not the absence of feeling. It was an enormous amount of feeling, compressed into the space between impulse and action. I've been carrying that compression ever since, and honesty is where this is going, whether I'm ready for it or not. I've built my life on a premise that I now need to examine. The premise is that I can tell the difference between the choices I make from strength and the choices I make from fear. That my decision-making architecture is clear enough, rigorous enough, that I can look at a choice I've made and say with honesty, this came from conviction. Or, this came from self-protection. I believed that. I don't believe it as confidently as I used to. Here's what I know about discipline, real discipline, the kind that produces results at the level I operate at. It feels like clarity. It feels like a force that moves through you without resistance, because you've already done the work of aligning your values with your behavior. When I make a genuinely disciplined decision, there's a quality to it that I've learned to recognize. It's clean. It moves forward. And here's what I know about fear. In its most sophisticated form, it presents itself as discipline. This is the part I should have understood earlier. Real fear, in a person who has trained themselves to be high-functioning, doesn't show up as paralysis. It doesn't show up as obvious avoidance. It shows up wearing discipline's clothes, using discipline's language, arriving with a completely reasonable explanation for why this particular action is not appropriate right now. I deleted your name from the search bar, and the story I told myself was, this isn't the right time. I'm not in the right headspace. The margin for error in this kind of communication is too high, and I need to be more certain before I act. Every word of that sounds like me. Every word of that sounds like how I actually think. Which is exactly the problem. Because that same voice, that precise, measured, risk-aware voice, is also the voice I'd use to rationalize not doing something that terrified me. Have you ever built something, a way of thinking, a discipline, a framework for making decisions, and then realized that the same tool that served you extraordinarily well in one domain was being deployed in another domain, in a way that maybe wasn't serving you at all? I'm a man who makes decisions under pressure with a clarity that other people find almost disconcerting. I don't hesitate in the ways that most people hesitate. That's not boasting. That's a description of a specific kind of person who paid a specific kind of price to become that way. And yet, your name in that search bar, and 47 seconds of complete uncertainty. That tells me something. I'm not sure I fully like what it tells me, but I've spent enough time studying complex systems to understand that the data points you least want to confront are usually the ones most worth examining. A man who is genuinely at peace with a choice doesn't replay it at 3:17 a.m. A man who has genuinely closed something doesn't keep finding it open in the part of himself that only gets honest in the dark. I've been telling myself a story about discipline for a long time. Tonight, I'm not sure the story is complete. I want to tell you something that I've never quite put into words before. I am very capable. I say that without ego, just as a statement of fact. I've spent years developing the capacity to do things that most people can't do, in domains that most people don't operate in, under conditions that most people haven't encountered. The evidence is in the world. It exists. It's not a self-assessment. It's a documented track record. And I am also the person who could not press send on a message to you. I want to sit with that gap for a moment, because I think it's one of the most honest things I've ever admitted. There's a thing that happens to people who develop extraordinary capacity in specific domains, and I know this because I've watched it in others as well as felt it in myself, where the domain of their capability becomes, over time, the domain of their comfort. And everything outside that domain begins to feel disproportionately large. I can handle complexity at a scale that is genuinely unusual. I can manage uncertainty about outcomes, about systems, about people operating in those systems, with a steadiness that I worked hard to develop. But this kind of uncertainty, the specific uncertainty of reaching out to you, of opening something that has been closed, of not being able to predict or control or optimize the outcome, this is outside the domain. And outside the domain, everything is harder than it should be. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The more capable you become in the areas you've chosen to develop, the more exposed you are in the areas you haven't. The gap between what I can do and what I did at 3:17 a.m. is visible. And I don't like visible gaps. But I've learned something about gaps over the years. Pretending they don't exist doesn't close them. Productivity doesn't close them. Achievement in adjacent domains doesn't close them. The only thing that closes a gap is direct, honest engagement with the specific thing that lives inside it. The question is not whether I can send a message. Obviously I can. The question is whether I can be honest, in the act of sending it, about what it actually means. Whether I can remove the plausible deniability. That requires a different kind of courage than I've spent my life developing. Not less, just different. And different things that look like they should be easy sometimes turn out to require everything. There's a specific quality to 3 a.m. that no other hour has. I've been awake at 3 a.m. more times than most people in circumstances that most people haven't been in. And I can tell you that the mythology around that hour is not overstated. Something genuinely different happens at 3 a.m. Not mystically different, I'm not a mystical person, but structurally different. The architecture of distraction collapses. All the mechanisms I have for keeping myself productively focused, the work, the problems, the decisions that need making, they don't function at 3 a.m. the way they function at other hours. The mind, even a very well-trained mind, loses access to the scaffolding that usually keeps things orderly. And what's left, when the scaffolding comes down, is just the actual content. What was actually underneath all the scaffolding in my case, on this particular 3 a.m. was you. Not as an emergency, not as grief, not as longing in any dramatic sense, just as a fact. Solid, precise. As real and present as anything I've built or decided or held together by force of will. I have spent considerable effort not looking directly at this particular fact. Not because it's painful. Pain is something I've made peace with, as a component of anything worth doing. But because looking at it directly requires admitting something about the choices I've made, I started to reach for my phone not because I had something urgent to communicate, not because there was a transaction, an update, a practical reason for contact. I reached for my phone because at 3 a.m., with nothing else available to hide behind, the most real thing in my life was the message I hadn't sent you. And the message I hadn't sent you is a thread that connects to a lot of other things I haven't said. Have you ever noticed how silence compounds? How one unsaid thing creates the conditions for the next unsaid thing? How the longer you go without naming something true, the more the naming of it starts to feel like an event, like something you need to prepare for, rather than just a thing you say to another person. The unsaid thing grew until it had its own architecture, its own weight, its own presence that fills space in a room even when the room is empty. At 3 a.m., the room was very empty. And what I learned in the specific clarity of that emptiness is that there's no productive version of this. The information I need is on the other side of the moment, not before it. It arrived at 3:17 a.m., and I almost wasn't brave enough to be home when it knocked. This is what I've been working my way toward. Not in this conversation, in this life. I've been circling something for long enough that the circling has become its own kind of life. The not sending has become a practice, deliberate, repeated, systematic. Not sending the message has become, at this point, something I am very good at. And I want to be clear about what that costs. The cost isn't sadness, exactly. It's not longing. It's something harder to name. A kind of flatness that shows up in moments that should be full. A persistent sense that something important is operating just below the surface of every other thing. The not sending is expensive. I've been paying for it in small amounts for a long time, and small amounts over a long time is still an enormous total. Here is what I've been avoiding understanding. Inaction is a choice. Silence is a choice. Keeping the message unsent, night after night, 3 a.m. after 3 a.m., that is not the absence of a decision. That is a decision, made repeatedly, with consequences that accumulate whether or not I acknowledge them. I've been choosing not to send the message. And I've been pretending that I haven't chosen anything. That's the thing I can't continue to do. There's a courage that I haven't been practicing. Not the courage of big decisions. I know that courage. I've had to use it repeatedly. I trust it. But the courage of small truth. The courage of saying to one person, in private, without an audience or a context, here is something real about me that I've been keeping in silence. I'm going to send the message. Not tonight, I want to say that clearly, because I don't want this to be the kind of revelation that burns bright in the moment and dissolves in the daylight. I want to send it when I'm certain that I'm sending it for the right reasons. When the decision has the same integrity I try to bring to every other significant decision in my life. But I'm going to send it. And I want to ask you, directly, specifically, what's the message you keep not sending? What would happen if you sent it? Because I've spent a long time finding reasons not to send mine. And I've become very sophisticated at the art of convincing myself those reasons are good ones. And tonight I finally understood that sophistication is not the same as wisdom. Wisdom would have sent the message a long time ago. I'm getting there.